1 minute ago, the United States Navy distributed an emergency survival guide to its personnel stationed in Naples, Italy. The document landed on desks across Naval Support Activity Naples with a weight that transcended paper. Inside, maps marked in red and yellow zones, instructions for earthquake survival, and warnings about volcanic gas. This is not a drill. This is not historical context. This is preparation for something that volcanologists now say could happen at any time. Over 500,000 people live directly on top of Campi Flegrei, a supervolcano whose caldera stretches 8 miles beneath their homes, schools, hospitals. Among them, thousands of American military families. The ground has risen 1.5 meters since 2005. Earthquakes now shake the region almost daily. Temperatures at the main fumarole have climbed to 168 degrees Celsius at the surface, with the hydrothermal system reaching 350 degrees below. And in 2024 and 2025, the strongest earthquakes in recorded history struck this ancient crater, cracking walls and forcing evacuations. Why is the U.S. Navy preparing its personnel now? What do they know that hasn't been made public? And if even the military is issuing survival brochures, what does that say about the danger facing everyone else? The western edge of Naples dissolves into a landscape that doesn't look like a volcano. No towering peak, no smoking cone, just neighborhoods and harbors, ancient ruins and busy streets, all built into the gentle hills of what geologists call a caldera. Campi Flegrei formed 39,000 years ago when an eruption so massive it collapsed the ground inward, leaving a crater 8 miles wide. That scar never healed. More than 500,000 people now live inside the red zone, the official evacuation area. Beyond that, another 6 million occupy the greater Naples region, close enough to face ash, toxic gas, and infrastructure collapse if the volcano wakes. The U.S. Navy maintains a significant presence here. Naval Support Activity Naples spreads across multiple sites, supporting thousands of military personnel, Defense Department civilians, and their families. Some live in Pozzuoli, the town at the crater's heart. Others occupy apartments in neighborhoods like Chiaia and Vomero, areas that fall within designated risk zones. In 2024, the Navy made a quiet but telling decision. Personnel wanting to move into red or yellow zones now must sign a letter acknowledging volcanic and seismic risks. The requirement came from the base commanding officer, a signal that risk assessments had changed. By late 2025, the acknowledgement alone wasn't enough. The Navy commissioned a full emergency readiness guide produced by Stars and Stripes, distributed free to every employee across the Naples installation. But acknowledging risk is not the same as understanding it. Campi Flegrei's history reads like a catalog of catastrophe. The eruption 39,000 years ago ranks as a VEI 7, one of the largest in European history. Ash blanketed the Mediterranean, and temperatures plummeted across the continent. Some scientists link the event to the disappearance of Neanderthals. The caldera never stopped moving. At least 70 eruptions have broken through its floor since that ancient collapse, each one opening new vents, building new craters, reshaping the landscape. The most recent eruption occurred in 1538. For weeks, the ground shook. The earth rose by more than 8 meters in just 2 years. Then, on September 29th, the land tore open near the village of Preparedness. Ash and pumice exploded skyward, burying homes and fields. By October 6th, a new hill stood where farms once thrived. Monte Novo, a volcanic cone born in days. That was nearly 500 years ago. The volcano has been restless ever since. Bradycism, the slow rise and fall of the ground, has continued for centuries. In the 1970s and 1980s, the caldera inflated by nearly 2 meters. Tens of thousands of residents were forcibly evacuated from Pozzuoli's historic Rione Terra district. Police and military cleared entire neighborhoods. The state seized the area permanently. Those buildings still stand empty, a ghostly reminder that volcanoes can displace entire communities without ever erupting. But that was decades ago. What's happening now is different. Since 2005, the ground has been rising again. Slowly at first, then faster. By early 2025, the uplift at Pozzuoli's Rione Terra GPS station reached 1.5 meters, exceeding the 1980s crisis by 58 centimeters. Seismicity has climbed in parallel. In 2023, the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology logged 2,500 earthquakes in a single month. Tremors that once passed unnoticed now rattle dishes, crack plaster, wake families at midnight. The strongest quake struck on May 20, 2024, magnitude 4.4. Shallow, just 2.5 kilometers deep. The shockwave cracked walls across Pozzuoli and western Naples, forcing the evacuation of tens of buildings. Residents who had grown accustomed to minor tremors stood in the streets, afraid to return. Then came June 30, 2024, magnitude 4.6. The largest earthquake ever instrumentally recorded at Campi Flegrei. Buildings that survived the 1980s crisis now faced new damage. Structural engineers flagged hundreds of homes. Some families moved out permanently. Others stayed, unable to afford relocation, gambling that the next quake wouldn't be worse. On March 13, 2025, another magnitude 4.6 earthquake struck at 0125 local time, waking tens of thousands. The pattern was unmistakable. The earthquakes were not isolated events. They were symptoms. But what came next shocked even the scientists.
In 2025, researchers using artificial intelligence analyzed seismic data going back a decade. They identified thousands of microquakes that the standard monitoring network had missed entirely. The swarms cluster along a newly recognized ring fault encircling the caldera, a structure that could focus future earthquakes and amplify their destructive power. The findings suggest the caldera is transitioning from diffuse microseismicity to the development of an extensional volcano-tectonic fault in its initial stages. The implications are stark. The rocks beneath Campi Flegrei are experiencing conditions for critical failure. Elastic deformation has given way to fracturing. The ground is no longer just stretching, it's breaking. At the Solfatara crater, the changes are not hidden in seismic charts. They're written in heat and gas. The main fumarole, known as Bocca Grande, now vents steam at surface temperatures of 168 degrees Celsius. A decade ago, readings hovered near 110 degrees Celsius. The hydrothermal system beneath pushes temperatures to 350 degrees Celsius, superheating fluids that rise through fractured rock. Carbon dioxide emissions from the Solfatara Pisciarelli area now exceed 5,000 tons per day. The gas is invisible but deadly. In 2017, an 11-year-old boy and his parents died at Solfatara when the ground collapsed beneath them. They fell into a volcanic pothole where hydrogen sulfide concentrations reached 2,200 parts per million and CO2 hit 98%. Asphyxiation was immediate. Autopsies revealed pulmonary edema and sulfhemoglobin in their blood. Solfatara closed to the public that day and has never reopened. But the gases don't respect fences. Thermal cameras now reveal hot spots spreading outward from the main vent, creeping beneath roads and into the foundations of nearby buildings. New fumaroles open along sidewalks and parking lots, sometimes overnight. Each time workers patch a fissure, another vent appears meters away. The volcano's heat is no longer just a distant threat. It presses up through the ground, invading the spaces people once called safe. For those living closest to Pisciarelli, the crisis is personal. In an apartment just off Via Antignana, Elena Russo wakes each morning to check the walls. She runs her hand along the plaster, searching for warmth. The outer wall radiates heat like a stovetop. At night, she opens every window, trying to vent the sharp, metallic smell that seeps in from outside. Her youngest son sleeps with a fan pointed at his bed, because the room temperature climbs, even when the heating is off. Some days, yellow mineral crusts appear on the floor, flaking onto tiles like volcanic snow. Last winter, repairs cost her more than €6,000. Heat-resistant paint, makeshift ventilation, repeated sealing of cracks that always reopen. Insurance companies refused coverage, citing volcanic exclusion clauses. Selling is not an option. Property values have collapsed. Few buyers want a home in the shadow of Solfatara. Elena's grandfather refuses to leave. We watch from the balcony as steam rises in the street. Every morning, we check if the paint is blistering. The volcano is not just beneath their feet. It has invaded their home. While Elena checks her walls, across the city, the U.S. Navy is preparing its personnel for the worst. The Naval Support Activity Naples Emergency Readiness Guide arrived in November 2025. Produced by Stars and Stripes, the brochure runs dozens of pages. It opens with maps of the Campi Flegrei and Vesuvius volcanic zones, color-coded by risk: red zones for highest danger, yellow zones for significant ashfall. The guide explains bradycism, fumaroles, magnitude scales, and epicenters. It includes a glossary so families can understand the technical language in Italian civil protection bulletins. The section on earthquake response is direct. Do not run outside during shaking. Avoid standing under interior doorways. Protect your head and neck. The guide even addresses pets, offering instructions for evacuation with animals. For volcanic eruptions, the message is simpler and more ominous. If evacuation orders come, leave immediately. Do not wait. NSA Naples maintains continuous communication with Italian emergency management officials. The base receives real-time information about volcanic and seismic activity, using it to influence operations and define environmental threats. In 2024, the Navy launched an earthquake and volcanic activity awareness campaign, organizing meetings and distributing information through social media channels. The release of the Survival Guide in late 2025 marked an escalation. But the guide does not explain everything.
The buildings in Pozzuoli and Bagnoli are old. Many date to before modern seismic codes. Stone walls, weak mortar, foundations that rest on soft volcanic ash. During the magnitude 4.6 earthquakes in 2024 and 2025, structural damage was widespread but not catastrophic. Walls cracked, roofs sagged, but the buildings stood. Engineers warned that a magnitude 5 or higher could change that outcome entirely. Older structures might collapse. Newer ones, built quickly and sometimes without proper permits, could fare no better. Evacuation routes are another problem. The Italian government has designated meeting points in twin regions where evacuees would be relocated. Sardinia and Sicily are prepared to receive tens of thousands. But moving 500,000 people out of the red zone, plus millions more from surrounding areas, would require days. Roads would clog, ports and airports would face overwhelming demand. If the volcano gives little warning, many will not make it out in time. Scientists cannot predict when or if an eruption will occur. They can measure ground deformation, track earthquake swarms, monitor gas emissions. But translating those signals into a definitive forecast remains beyond current capability. Giovanni Macedonio, director of the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology in Naples, has stated publicly that the recent earthquakes are the strongest ever recorded. Yet he and his colleagues cannot say whether they signal imminent eruption or simply another cycle of unrest that will subside without catastrophe. The debate within the scientific community is real. Some researchers believe the uplift in seismicity result primarily from degassing magma and hydrothermal interactions, with little direct magma ascent. Others point to new data suggesting magma is closer to the surface than previously thought, perhaps as shallow as 3 to 5 kilometers. Studies using seismic tomography have identified fluid-rich zones at depths that challenge older models. If magma is rising, the risk of a phreatic or magmatic eruption increases. But no one can be certain. What volcanologists do know is that Campi Flegrei is a supervolcano with a magma chamber 1,000 times larger than typical volcanoes. An eruption here would not be like Vesuvius in 79 AD. It would be larger, more violent, with potential to affect not just Naples, but all of Europe. Ash clouds could rise 18 miles into the sky, halting air travel across the continent. Pyroclastic flows could race through valleys, incinerating everything in their path. The economic and human cost would be staggering.
The Italian government allocated more than 500 million euros in 2024 for building reinforcement and emergency planning. Civil protection agencies run drills, testing evacuation procedures and coordination between local and national authorities. In November 2024, exercises in Naples, Pozzuoli, and Pozzuoli simulated mass evacuations, activating coordination centers and evacuating school buildings. The exercises revealed gaps. Shelters in some provinces were already running below capacity, not for lack of need, but because roofs damaged by previous earthquakes had not been repaired. Some evacuation centers are now as exposed as the homeless people would leave behind. The risk extends beyond the immediate blast zone. If Campi Flegrei erupts, the cascade begins. Power grids fail as ash shorts out transmission lines. Water pumps stop. Mobile networks collapse. Hospitals switch to emergency generators, but fuel supplies run out within days. Food deliveries stall. Pharmacies close. The interconnected systems that sustain a modern city begin to fracture, and the fracture spreads outward. The U.S. Navy is not waiting for permission to prepare. The release of the emergency guide reflects a calculated assessment. The risk is real, the timeline is uncertain, but the potential for catastrophe is high enough to warrant formal, documented preparation. If the civil protection officials issue an evacuation order, U.S. military personnel and their families will be expected to move quickly, following protocols outlined in the brochure. The Navy has already required personnel in high-risk zones to acknowledge the danger in writing. Now it has given them the tools to respond. But acknowledgement and tools are not guarantees. Today, nearly 110 million Filipinos face the threat of back-to-back super typhoons. Over 500,000 Italians live on top of a supervolcano that is showing every sign of unrest. The U.S. Navy has issued survival guides to its personnel in Naples. Italian authorities have mapped evacuation zones and allocated hundreds of millions of euros to emergency preparedness. Scientists have deployed AI to track microquakes and installed new seismic networks to monitor every tremor. Yet, no one can say when or if Campi Flegrei will erupt. The ground continues to rise, the earthquakes continue to shake, the fumaroles continue to vent superheated gas. The people of Pozzuoli continue to live their lives, checking their walls each morning, watching steam rise from the streets, hoping the next quake will not be the one that brings their homes down. The U.S. Navy's brochure is more than a document. It is a statement. The danger is not hypothetical, it is immediate and real. The question is no longer to whether to prepare, but whether preparation will be enough. If the strongest earthquakes in recorded history are not the warning, what will it take? And when the volcano finally makes its decision, will anyone have time to respond?